Hey, it's Stu, and this is a reading wrap-up. It mostly includes my Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month TBR, plus a couple that I just threw in to that TBR. Oh yeah, and just one other kind of, random book. We'll get there, right? So let's just jump in. I'll just jump with the first digital-only book I read, which was Strange Houses by Uketsu. So this was going to be a potential buddy read, and I had to put it on hold because I didn't have a physical copy, although my friend did. Decided just to go ahead and put it on hold at the library. It was on hold for a very long time, and then while I was in Oregon, came off hold. So this was a fantastic, just short, fun, kind of dark, but mostly engaging read. And so if you like mystery, you don't mind it going a little bit dark, and you can suspend disbelief, then this is a great series. I think this is the first in 3 books. I have other friends, and certainly there's enough internet hype around this series, which is Strange Houses, Strange Pictures, and Strange Buildings. If I happen upon the other books, I will read them. I found this entertaining enough, but it's not something that I will intentionally seek out. So the other sort of buddy read that happened was Lauren Groff's Matrix. This was such an interesting read because I read it right after The Hexes of the Deadwood Forest, which I talked about in my last reading review. And The Hexes of the Deadwood Forest was definitely transgressive and absolutely opposed to religiosity, and most specifically Catholicism, and definitely called them out, that particular religion and Catholicism out, for its misogyny, its patriarchal oppression, and for known historical atrocities such as witch tortures and massacres. Lauren Groff's Matrix, on the other hand, also had to do with religiosity, but it was sort of like religious bliss, and how in this sort of historical fiction setting, females found both bliss and meaning and community within the context of religion. It was a bit jarring, those to go from one to the other, and also a really fantastic thing to do as a reader, right? To just keep your brain really moving around lots of different ways to think about and be, and not let it be sort of narrow in its scope or vision. And so I liked that. Did I like Matrix? I didn't not like it. I liked Lauren Groff's prose. I felt it a little hard to get engaged in this book, and maybe just because, around it, I just had read The Hexes of the Deadwood Forest, and I think I was also reading that Uketsu book at the similar time. And so maybe a little bit of the lyricism, maybe some of the mysticism, and maybe even some of the content of this book, I found it a little difficult to get engaged in. This book came under high recommendation by somebody who very much liked it, but it wasn't their favorite Lauren Groff book. I have Arcadia and would definitely pick up another Lauren Groff if I found another. If you like historical fiction, you like to explore those themes that I said, such as feminism and how females made meaning inside of the context. This is very particularly the church. And this setting is, I want to say the Middle Ages, but that's the thing about me and timelines. I feel it's 1158. Yeah, 1158. It's just sort of what's going on in the lives of humans in Europe at that time. Then this is the book for you. Okay, and now maybe in reverse order, let's do all my AAPI books. Most of them I did on a TBR, but some of them just kind of came up or I decided to go ahead and do. I'm not fully done with After Parties by Anthony Visna. So on the TBR, I think I misspoke. I said this was Filipino American. Indeed, it's not. It's Cambodian American. And the setting is Central California, so not quite LA. And I think it matters. It matters in the book, both of those points that I was mistaken in my TBR. Yeah, this short story collection as a collection, although I haven't finished the last couple of stories, really works. Not all collections work. And that's, one thing that's interesting about short stories. You don't have to read them as collections. You can read them independently. But since I'm such a novel reader these days and I have time, I like to try to complete the collection and think of it as a whole. These characters in some ways are connected. And certainly in a lot of sort of like the community and thematically are connected. This is one of those books that like is heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time, and authors that can really pull that off. And stay kind of groovy and maybe funny and contemporary and also deep and meaningful. I found all of that true inside a single story, not just throughout the stories in this. It got a fair amount of praise, of critical acclaim, as it should have. I can see why. I highly recommend this book to folks who like literary and contemporary, maybe fiction. And yes, I was correct when I did the TBR that this author is now passed. So there is something precious about the analog, right? And the lasting nature of how these stories and these ideas, exist in my actual hand in a physical form, that is more profound, knowing that this author is no longer with us to share more ideas and stories, but I had the great honor and privilege of getting to know these ones in After Parties. Rooftops of Tehran by Mahmoud Siraji. Yeah, it's about like in the late 70s, mid 70s, sorry, it's 1973. So that's even early 70s. We started in 1973 and I think we get through 74, maybe 75. And this is the time of the Shah, the build up to the revolution. And we are in one neighborhood block in Tehran, and we're really getting to know individuals and families in this little community. And, the consequences on real lives, I think that, of oppression, right? I needed to finish that sentence. The consequences on real lives of oppression. We get just from this small snippet of this like little cutout of which is a very large city, a look at some of Iran's long and Persia's long and storied history, which impacts its culture, and also the diversity within this area of the world. We see how what's going on globally is impacting also this neighborhood. And there's a lot of heartbreak and there's a lot of resilience. This overall is a love story. It is a very romanticized love story. And I'm not a biggest fan of love story, but I think in the context and all the context that Mahmoud Siraji lays out, the love story is appropriate. It has to do with human resilience and just how powerful love is in a sort of philosophical sense. Prose is pretty straightforward. We have a couple flashback moments, and I felt like maybe those were just put in there to kind of make the story interesting, but they worked. And there were some times when I was like, oh, this book had some opportunity to be quite a bit more literary than it is. And also, sometimes what I like about books being a little bit less literary is they're more accessible. What I felt about this book and what I say often about books is this is someone who's really, really, really trying to tell a story to people who have maybe ideas and opinions about that are uninformed and maybe even a little bit ignorant. So I felt like this was written as an homage and a love story to this neighborhood in Tehran, but also for folks who maybe don't know that much or think they know something about a place and time in the world when their information is limited or even misinformed. As you know, always demonstrated, for instance, by reading discussion questions at the end, you can kind of get a feel for, okay, what do they assume that the reader already knows or doesn't know? I have been waiting to read this book for a long time. I'm glad that I did. I'm really looking forward to reading some of the Iranian and in translation authors who have come up recently on the International Booker, and a couple that I also just have in my collection who are female voices. This was a male voice, and it was very clearly through a male voice, but one thing that I can tell you where I did see some patriarchy, I thought it was he was gentle and loving towards women in a patriarchal way, albeit, and also there wasn't, even though even on the back it describes a female. So I'm going to use the word love interest since I called this a romance, as beautiful. And, you know, I'm to the point in my life, can we just not, like, parts of the book really rectify themselves for that. It's interesting because in this story, there is a moment of patriarchal and even religious misogyny, where a woman is beaten to death and called a gold digger. I'm going to use that as a segue to this book, but I also, again, I guess now's a good time to give there are descriptions of torture in this book, and I think all books should come with activation warnings or content warnings about any kind of hardship, but torture should be and is torture. So it is traumatic to read and think about, and I think that and assaults really should be high on the list of maybe don't read this book if you are not in a mental or emotional state to think about that. It's a human condition, which happens throughout multiple societies and throughout our history, and in this book. So I'll segue now to Gold Diggers by Sanjina Santhion. This is sort of a very contemporary, reads like a very contemporary book. It was fun and thrilling in a lot of ways. It used some magic realism, and the author and the author's notes did quite a bit of research around, you know, gold rushes in the U.S. and the use of like apothecary. Do you ever get that when you're like, I have this word and I say it all the time? Well, not all the time, but enough, and now I can't say it. Anyway, gold in that, in human magical longevity, or trying ways to live longer. There were scenes. So there's a male POV. This is written by a female identified author, and there's a male POV, and there's some scenes about, you know, girls' hymens being thick or late or being hairy. That, sure, boys can talk like that or do talk like that. Do I want them to talk like that, like in the books that I read? I don't know. Only if it's like raising criticism. And this was sort of like maybe more slice of life, or kind of almost felt like boys will be boys. And it annoyed me, honestly, right at the beginning of the book. And I found, you know, her first person male protagonist, you know, somewhat interesting, but also somewhat off-putting throughout this book. Interesting like this book has a lot of how many times am I going to say that word? Oh my gosh. Has a lot of poignant and maybe even creative ways to look at capitalism, social norms, aspirations, mythology, in some cases, diaspora of Indian communities, in this particular case, across America. I thought there was a lot of sort of pretty surface level, but poignant and creative commentary in this book, and that made it a worthwhile read. I did actually had an extra copy of this book, and I gave it to someone who said they liked magic realism, and now I would like to give them more like caveats to this book so that they can understand, because I think the things that off-put me about this book would also be quite off-putting, and it happens pretty early in the book. And I'm kind of like not to the place where I'm like, just DNF. I'm not that. I like to try to see a book through, but I'm very little patience for flippant misogyny. I just very, very little patience for that. That being said, it was a fun read. Again, that I'm going to use the word interesting, and now that had some interesting reflections and felt quite, modern. Not as in like modern lit, but like contemporary in that way. Okay. Suzanne Choi's The Foreign Student is historical fiction. Again, this book was written in the 90s. This is my third Suzanne Choi. I've only just recently read The Flashlight as I was reading the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, and still am. I have a couple books left. This book is quite a bit different than the other two Susan Choi's books that I've read. It, in fact, felt less overwritten than Flashlight, and more sort of like, even in Trust Exercise, like the first two-thirds of the book, and then, the end of the book, you're like, okay, now I'm glad I read this book and I should have paid attention. So I always think of Suzanne Choi of like, this is why you don't just DNF reminder author. This book wasn't like that at all. It stayed pretty frequent. We go through we go in and out of a couple two POVs, the two protagonists, and timelines. The handling of the assault of the 14-year-old who believes she's consenting to a grown adult, and then their lifelong romance, is social commentary, and it made me uncomfortable, as it should. And I think there was still some missed opportunities to make it abundantly clear that we understand, that there is an understanding that's not just like even timely, that a 14-year-old girl, a 14-year-old person is a child, and that is assault. Also, I want to say this is another book. This gave a lot of sort of personal history of the Korean War, and I trusted Suzanne Choi to provide me with information that I hadn't known before, and at least lead me in a direction to learn more, and for it to be informed. I appreciated that. This look at the American South as the setting as well during this time was also, I thought Suzanne Choi did very well. Again, huge content warning for torture. This book has scenes of torture. And it, it's, I think it's important to know with you get into a book that you might have to endure that, and of course someone has to not look away. These stories have to be told, and also readers should be informed. So I'd like to inform of that. Yeah, I'm glad I read it. It felt, it definitely felt like it was written in a different time, and also the messages are stood up. I thought this book stood up. And Suzanne Choi's writing, as you know, as many people say, sentence per sentence is quite beautiful. Okay, Rejection by Toni Tulathamote. This book was recommended to me at an independent bookstore, and I got it used. It was in the used section, and the bookseller, the employee there, was like, "Oh yeah, I really loved this book." So I'm excited. So this is a sidebar because that feels that's one of the prompts of a book bingo, a summer book bingo that I'm doing. This is interconnected short stories, and I do like interconnected short stories when they're done well. And I can say that Toni Tulathamote writes extraordinarily well. I really liked his writing. The first story, The Feminist, really grasped me, and it really, it told me like, this is satire. This is full-on satire, and it's not often. Is satire dying? Are people really not able to, like, I don't want to fall into like any huge discussion of like cancel culture and, the surveillance that's happening, one person amongst another. It seems like a kind of unsafe place for satire, but also we're still experiencing so much that maybe, I don't want to say cancel, but people should be like called to the carpet to explain, why they're just using flippant misogyny as just a plot point. This book certainly claps back at all of that, and it pushes back on so many constructs that people just accept, and that are even somewhat polarizing. It takes some real universal stances of like, have you thought through it? It makes you really say, have you thought through it? Have you really, really thought through it? The characters are absolutely messy, and maybe it's because they're so brutally honest. Like, this book is so internal and they're so brutally honest. Like, if we were all brutally honest like that, we'd all be messy. Or maybe they're just hot fucking messes. Am I a reader that's like of the age maybe where I'm just like, get your shit together? Perhaps. I also found out, so there's a lot of like the use of text medium in here, and there's also a lot of language appropriate for like Generation Z that I found so annoying. And that's a me thing. But I also found, like, when I'm reading an analog book, the first time I encountered it, like books written with text messages, I said, oh, this is clever. Of course, this is useful. Of course, this is even necessary. But right now, I don't want to read text messages. I want to read stories written like in long form with deliberate sentences and prose. And I think I really had to work through that. I was like, I am so annoyed reading all of these group chats. Like, I don't want to read group chats, period. Like, I'm so fed up with group chats at work and in general, and I understand their importance. Don't get me wrong. I'm not totally curmudgeonly about it. And, on my leisure time, like, I really am finding it more and more necessary to unplug. And so when I unplug and then see it on an analog page, I'm like, that's a me thing. That was a me thing. This book annoyed the shit out of me in so many ways, but useful ways, but really useful ways. This is one of those books that there are moments of pure joy and pleasure and intrigue I had in this book. And there are other moments of, as I said, pure annoyance. But in the end of the day, could I see what Toni was doing? Could I appreciate what Toni was doing? Did I think Toni was doing this well? Absolutely, yes. Will I continue to think about this book? Will I maybe even hold on to this book, or at least footnote it for like, need to read it again? Because the first reading probably was just to get like used to some of those things that annoyed me, and then the second reading I can read it for more depth, perhaps, because of all of the books I think in this pile, and there's a couple more left, this is the one that I think really reached the furthest and made me think the most. You Know What You Did by Katie Nguyen. Okay, this was a listen while I was driving through a terrible storm. And then and then on a bizarre long bus ride. So I say that because I wanted, when I got done listening, I actually listened to that Suzanne Choi mostly. When I got done listening to that, I was going to take a long drive, and I was like, and I knew it was going to be through some weather, and I was like, I just need, kind of a suspense thriller kind of thing, where the pacing is fast and it's even maybe more convenient for something like an audio medium. I wasn't wrong. There were parts of this book. I actually thought there was social commentary in this book that I thought was quite clever, and well done. And then, this is a suspense, which I know people love plot twists. They suspend their disbelief. They just never get me. Like, there's never a twist I can't see coming. Unless I'm deliberately doing that thing, which I think that people do. So I found it a little long for people who like suspense and thrillers, for sure. Also with a little bit of depth and social commentary. I thought some of the social commentary in here was pretty good. Some of it a little contrived, but some of it pretty good. And overall, yeah, I mean, I would recommend this book to thriller, I'm sort of more suspense kind of readers. Okay, finally, Kazuo Ishiguro's When We Were Orphans. This was another listen, mostly. The font in this book wasn't incredibly inclusive, so I couldn't spend very long in it. Although there were times when I wanted to go back after having listened and experienced the spatial and written text and read over a couple things a few times. This is now my official second Ishiguro book. I have reread, oh my gosh, how could I just mind blank? Because the book that I thought that was The Remains of the Day that wasn't Wish You Were Here. Yeah. I reread that several times thinking that it was Remains of the Day that I had read. Alas, I have Remains of the Day right here with a couple other of Ishiguro's, and I can say after the second one, two is two enough to say I'm an Ishiguro fan, even though I thought that I read three. It's still just two. Yeah, he, on a surface level, it's a very propulsive story. It takes place right at the begin, it starts at the turn of the century in Shanghai and sort of Boxer Rebellion and what England was up to in their colonizing ways, what Britain was up to in their colonizing ways then. And then we have someone who's orphaned and he goes back to England and he becomes a detective. And it ends up being like a propulsive sort of detective mystery as he returns to Shanghai to find his missing parents. And it's absurd in some ways, but it's very deliberately absurd. The history of the war, of the Japanese occupation in Shanghai and how the world was gearing up to war, this sort of like attitudes of and mindsets of colonizers was very thoroughly explored. And yeah, there are sometimes I'm like, wow, that's just preposterous. But it works. The story was propulsive and easy to read on a surface level as a detective mystery, maybe with a little bit of something that, just detective mystery readers might be like, why are we talking so much, about the context? And also the context he does very, very well. And one could also read this through multiple different lenses and the depths that, literary fiction is, Nobel Prize winning authors have. And yeah, I would recommend this book to people who are like lit fic most of the time, but genre fic. Like lit fic some of the time and genre fic most of the time. Because this book feels like it bridges those two worlds in a pretty substantial way. Easy, fun read. It reminds me a bit like Drive Your Plow in that way. Like there's twists and plot propulsions, and then also go ahead and read it as a true literary fiction because it'll work for that as well. Yeah, there were some scenes I even described there's a scene on the Bund that having lived in China for a while and having been to the Bund several times, just worked so well for me when the Japanese warships are on the Yangtze River, and the British post-colonial folks are still on the Bund, like watching the warships lob bombs over that district, the international district, into the district where all of the nationals of the country they're in live, and with opera glasses, that I just found so, like, it was just so well written. It was just would be such a great scene, obviously in a book, but also in a movie. And interestingly enough, this is one of the only Ishiguro books that's not been made into a movie, because a lot of his books have, including Never Let Me Go. I'm sorry, that's the title that I was thinking of the book I read many times. Anyway, that was a pretty impressive stack of reading. I keep saying I've slowed down, and I have. It's probably been longer since my last review video than I normally do, but in reflection, part of the reason I do review videos is to look back and say, wow, no, I'm still reading quite a bit. I mean, more than many, if not most people. And I'm not saying that in any kind of braggadocious way. I'm a voracious reader, have been most of my life, and now I have time, when I first wake up, while I'm waiting, while I'm walking, while I'm choring, and before bed, that I, didn't have, and mental space. So I continue to be a reader full of gratitude for all of the work that all of these authors put in to bring me these stories. I have obtained from this group, which is all under a single Heritage Month. There's just so much diversity in the way that story is told, and in the plot and the setting and the characters. And it just reminds me of all of these fantastic things that make our world enjoyable, worth fighting for, and human. So until next time, happy reading.